This is episode 6 of Democracy After Disaster, a 9-part documentary podcast series best listened to in order from episode 1. Back in episode 4, I mentioned attending the AFAC exhibition in Adelaide in 2022, which was part of the AFAC conference, the biggest emergency shindig in the country. The reason I was at AFAC was to attend a day tacked on at the end of the week called the National Recovery Forum. The day was designed along democratic principles so that people participated, considered questions and had conversations. This was the first and, as it turns out, the last time this kind of day has been held at AFAC. The 200-odd people attending were a mix of government and agency workers, people from disaster-affected communities, and anyone interested in the wide field of recovery. In the afternoon, they ran a process called Open Space Technology, where participants set the agenda for what they wanted to talk about. And I offered a session.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm making a podcast and I'd like to have a conversation about how we create shared power in our democratic bureaucratic system. That's shared power in recovery. And I'll be recording, so if you don't want to be recorded, come on. Thanks. Table 1.
I sat there for several agonising minutes while the room of 200 people milled and mixed and did anything but come towards me. And just as I was starting to feel like a complete fool, wanting to talk about things clearly no one else was interested in, a woman came up to the table and said she would like to speak to me. I was gushing in my welcome, and then we started chatting. I'll call her Karen, and for reasons that will become clear in a minute, I can't play you the recording of our conversation. Karen was a community recovery officer with East Gippsland Shire Council, which we know from episode 5 was badly impacted by the Black Summer fires. She also lived in the community she was supporting and was deeply interested in the issues of democracy and community-led recovery. Karen and I had a great conversation. She was thoughtful and passionate about both how she could work with community as a public servant and how her community could work with government in a way that empowered them. At the end, she said she was part of a team, they discussed these issues often, and she felt sure some of them would want to talk to me too. Yippee, I had hit podcasting gold. So a few months later, I emailed Karen, said I was coming to Mallacoota. She asked her team, 3 said yes, and she put us in touch with each other to make the arrangements. 3 days before I was due to head off, she sent me an email.
Hi, Kate. I'm really sorry, but I have been instructed that we will not be able to engage in this project. This will include the withdrawal of my interview recorded at the conference in Adelaide. Many apologies for this news so close to your visit to East Gippsland, and all the best with the project.
Democracy in action. This is Democracy After Disaster, a podcast about power and money and how communities recovering from bushfire or any disaster need to be empowered in their recovery if they're not to be further harmed by the systems meant to help them. My name's Kate Lawrence, and in this 6th episode of the series, we'll be looking at the complex situation of government workers who walk the hard road alongside communities recovering from disaster. While I was appalled at the overt silencing of Karen and her team, when they could add so much to the discussion I want this podcast to be about, freedom of speech is a gnarly issue that gets tangled when it comes to employees and a tight, twisted knot when it comes to government workers. Access to information is a cornerstone of democracy because this enables us to make informed choices when we vote. And information held by public servants is obviously relevant to our choice. Yet,
the values of that professional administration of impartiality and non-partisanship necessarily constrain free speech by public servants.
This is Professor Andrew Podger from ANU, who we heard in episode 2.
At the same time, good public administration does require public engagement by public servants. It's not as if there's to be no public engagement, but there are constraints on political comment.
What a balancing act. Be an expert, speak, but in an impartial way. Which is what exactly? It reminds me of the supposed objectivity of judges. Add in a bit of reputation management, and it's no wonder we sometimes get robotic bafflegab. This is hard. While there's no specific protection of free speech in Australian law, there are constraints and guidelines, particularly for public servants. In Victoria, local councils have to have an employee code of conduct, which in East Gippsland Shire says that only certain people, like the CEO, mayor, managers, are authorised to speak to the media. But the media policy says, via a cloned voice of someone called Jackie Griffin, that
the policy is not intended to guide how councillors or staff interact with the media as private citizens, including as spokespeople for clubs, organisations or causes. If a staff member is speaking on an issue as a private citizen, they must clearly indicate that the views are either personal or representing an organisation other than council.
I just want to be real clear that I'm speaking as a civilian. I'm not speaking as a council employee. But I will speak about my experience working for council and working for BRV. But I'm an individual person, not representing either of them.
This is Paula Jorgensen, who, to my surprise and great joy, wrote to me a few hours after I received that email from Karen and said, I believe the accounts of response and recovery are important, particularly in the context of democracy. So I'm still willing to be interviewed on my own time as a civilian if that fits your brief. It certainly did fit my brief. One other thing to note is that this interview took place 3 years before it is being published, and when I emailed Paula, she was at pains to point out that some things in East Gippsland Shire have changed since the interview, and for the better. As you heard earlier from Paula's accent, Paula's not from around here being the continent of Australia. She grew up in Southern California, and via some time in Melbourne, she eventually found her way to a very cool pad in Nawa, which I visited on my way home from Malakuta. Paula's experiences growing up shaped her views and passions around democracy.
I am a democracy geek. I'm community development and community engagement, but local government is a great vehicle for that. I grew up in another place where it was representative democracy, but your representatives were quite accessible. It was completely normal to come home and find your local councillor at the kitchen table, or to be able to go to a meeting, make a meeting and have a conversation about something that mattered.
Now, of course, the time Paula was growing up with her Democratic representative at the kitchen table was in the 60s and 70s, and she acknowledges that things have changed.
Because everyone's so risk averse now, representatives are pulled way back from the people. You can look at democracy as a pure system, but how it's applied differs from place to place. So you've got representation, you've got the democracy, the system, and then you've got the politics of and government. So you've got this weird wobbly three-legged stool where they're not all balanced. We pay way more attention to the politics than we do the representation.
By representation, Paula means the elected person thinking about and representing the needs and preferences of the people in the electorate. And we'll unpack what this means in a moment. Paula sees her work squarely within a democratic framework.
I think what people define democracy as the voting system, that we get a vote and the majority wins, that's that. But the representative part of it, it's hard to find. And the participatory part of it, which I'm really most keen on, it's not linked up in people's minds that they're participating in a democracy. They're actually in a fight or a struggle against or for them, or advocating for themselves rather than working with. And that's what's the piece that's missing to me. So that's why I love my work, because it's kind of building those bridges back. making that middle piece possible.
When Paula first moved to East Gippsland, she worked for BRV, Bushfire Recovery Victoria, which was set up by the Victorian state government after the Black Summer fires of 2019-2020.
I joined BRV because I was really interested in the community-led recovery, the concept, and how the model could have been applied in a community-led way.
And while the theory was sound, Paula encountered a couple of problems that in the end she found insurmountable.
But the first step was they worked with local governments, and at East Gippsland Shire, the place managers became the recovery-focused officers. So by the time BRV had hired, me as a community engagement officer, that work was well underway, and there was nothing for me except to kind of trot around behind the place managers and, make sure everything was going the BRV way. I'm not a compliance officer. I'm there for the community.
The second problem was more fundamental.
I didn't see any possibility for the community to, they could lead if they did all the work. And they're supposed to be recovering, not working, not singing for their supper. So I couldn't keep asking community to put in all that hard work to just get resources and then manage the resources for their recovery. In one sense, it was community-led, but not necessarily representational. But in another sense, it was a massive waste of good community energy and really frustrating. And the strongest people couldn't go through that process, but a lot of people fell off as, almost like damaged from it.
This observation echoes the issues raised by Carol Hopkins in the last episode, that the current way governments facilitate community-led recovery is not only unsustainable, but often harmful. Which is why in the final 3 episodes of this podcast series, we'll be exploring solutions for both governments and communities to move the dial towards community-led recovery that renews rather than depletes community. After BRV, Paula went to work for East Gippsland Shire Council as a place manager. Her role was to support communities to implement their recovery plans and projects by being the linchpin between the community recovery committees, the council, BRV, and any other agencies. She saw it as a chance to strengthen that bridge between community and government. Paula no longer works with East Gippsland Shire Council, and she's speaking here as a community member. East Gippsland Shire was by no means Paula's first job in local government, but it was her first in a rural municipality.
There's something like 46,000 people out here, and it's huge and vast. It's like, I tell my family, this is the size of San Diego County, or maybe it's the size of Southern California. No, it's not, but maybe it is the size of Southern California. It's enormous. And when people see, I know, I'm going to drive that car that's out front up the hill, and people are going to see an East Gippsland Shire Council car, and they're going to be like, oh my God, what are you doing here? Because no one ever comes up there. The further east you go, the less council presence there is.
When Paula says up the hill, she really means a 2 to 3 hour drive into the Great Dividing Range.
We tend to stay inside our offices and service centers because the organization wants us to be there where they can work with us, and forgetting, of course, that we need to turn ourselves inside out and be out there with the people so that they can participate in their own government.
In addition to the size, another difference Paula noticed almost immediately was around information flow between council and the community and the impact this had on democratic representation. Paula had come from Marybeck City Council, previously called Moreland, a large inner urban council in Melbourne where years earlier she'd been involved in their transition to a much better process of listening to community.
There was a CEO at Moreland who was under siege by members of the community because of the poor engagement. And there was no engagement team, or it was just a little part of my job to make sure that the the community engagement policy framework existed and was up to date, best practice.
Then a group of community members began to push for something better in this large inner city council.
What came of it after a few meetings with that group of community was that we needed to unpack this all in the same room. So not counselors and CEO then telling the community, but with the community and with the community-facing staff and counselors to whom it mattered and the CEO, and we all sat together.
What an amazing innovation. Everyone in the same room. The process continued and gathered structure and strength.
Now there's a department of, it's communications and reputation. But they are doing engagement better. But the fact that Power said, we're going to take the time to sit with you, listen to you. They got so much respect from the community for being willing to care that deeply. So in the next government satisfaction survey, community engagement went from the lowest urban or the second lowest urban to, about average. And I'm sure it's gone up since. That was an example of how by bringing their power and sharing it with all, they actually did get more power.
But when Paula arrived in East Gippsland, the difference was stark.
It feels to me like they edit what they think is important to council. Council's the governing body. CEO reports to the councilors. They shouldn't be managing the information that goes to them. They're responsible for the big decision making, the guidance, the big steering. They're steering the ship. But instead they get fed particles, and so do community. We get fed particles. You have to go searching to find out what's going on and then do a survey, and that's community engagement. One of the tensions in local government is that, back to democracy again, is officers are people facing, but managers and senior managers are not, and to a certain degree, counselors even aren't people facing. So how do you get the representation part into the information, into the decision making?
News reports, our own experiences, and TV shows like Utopia and Yes Minister would tell most of us that East Gippsland Shire is not alone in this way of government administration.
Whose job is it to sort through, these are all the issues, and what are we going to do about it? I mean, it's a combination between council and the administration is there to enact counselors' decisions and visions through one person, the CEO. My God, that's a lot of responsibility. And then anybody that's not a manager or above can't talk to counselors. How do you know what the conversations are? There are council meetings here in East Gippsland Shire. They're public, and people can come and ask questions, and they can come and listen to most of the conversations and debates and decisions. But how do we know? I don't know as a citizen that council is well informed or transparently informed about what's important to the Shire.
Paula gave a concrete example of how this played out in East Gippsland.
There's a proposed iron ore mine for about 8 kilometers north of here. And if that proposal is allowed to go ahead, it will affect the water catchments for agriculture to the east and for Lake Tyers, which is the closest to pristine of all the lakes in the lake system. And it's, they're all Ramsar listed, and Lake Tyers is sacred. Plus, the impacts on the roads and the dust and loads and loads of impacts. Councilors haven't discussed it or don't have a position on it. But the administration is talking to the mining companies because it's through the economic development and planning departments. They look at the economic or employment benefits or that they look at everything through that lens, but they're not looking holistically at what's best for the people, what's best for the place as well. And what is going to work for the people? The knowledge of the mine came from particular employees at council without the whole council having a position on it. Where's the governance? Where's the major decision making? I think it happens I think it happens in the administration, gets presented to council, and they go, yes, no.
For Paula, it's not that there aren't good, caring people within councils.
Some of them, it's quite obvious, do care about people and the place. And I think they all care in some way, shape, or form, but the more conventional kind of care is always looking at the financial bottom line of things. We have a healthy economy. We have a healthy society.
So it seems that instead of government as democratic representative, we have government as corporation, as business.
We've moved so far away from local government as a form of democracy to local government as a big bureaucratic institution that it administers a lot of stuff, but is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? Is it looking after people in place? Yeah, they deliver some service as well. But the rest, it's like hit and miss.
After I left the law, I was trying to find what was mine to do in the world, and I knew it wasn't going to be with the CFA. Then I got a job in local government, and I eventually worked for 3 councils. And I learned a fair bit about how local government works, the strictures and sometimes absurd scenes from hierarchy, the often damned if you do and damned if you don't position of government, the special and well-paid role of the consultant, and the wisdom, insight and periodic intractability of community folk. But in hindsight, what stands out is the fact that I was never once in 3 different local governments educated about my role as a council officer in the democratic process. A symptom of the modern corporate nature of local government, perhaps, but not even in one of those dreadful online self-directed learning modules was there anything about the act that governed me or how I was to exercise my public service power. And it was the same for Paula.
I still haven't had any kind of induction when I landed at East Gippsland. They don't make sure that we understand what the Local Government Act is and what local government is for. They just make sure that we understand all the IT systems and our reporting requirements. And they're so good at tick the box. The policies that exist are the policies that are legislated that we have to have. They weren't created because they have meaning and validity. They're created because we have to have them.
This lack of education for local government workers seems a glaring oversight and, in the context of recovery from disasters, significant. Because despite being at the bottom of the government pecking order, local government is closest to the people and communities called on immediately in the wake of disaster, and the ones best able to support community-led recovery. And just as council workers have little understanding of their role in democracy, there's very little attention paid to what exactly representation means for our elected representatives. What is required of someone in order for them to represent others, to be a representative? In our democratic system, is it only meant to be an interactive process during the election campaign? And once elected, representatives make whatever decisions they consider reflective of the promises they made before they were elected, always with the rider that was then and this is now. Or is there an obligation to continually seek out, to listen, engage and reflect the community sentiment as best you can throughout your tenure? Which then begs the question, what is the best way to do that, to ascertain and reflect community opinion? Is it to rely on public administrators? Is it to rely on the media? Is it to rely on lobbyists and activists? There's no guidance, let alone regulations or rules or even good practices for the elected to be representative. And so the public servants and the loudest voices, squeakiest wheels and biggest bank accounts get the ears of the elected. All in a system that filters everything through reputation protection, where perception is more important than substance, optics reign over truth, and where communication means spin.
you watch how governments operate, and it's all about party politics or reputational politics. It's not really about the people. Yeah, that whole thing about reputation management that's like some outflow of some waste product of capitalism, that and now that everything is measured by dollars, like what happened to the triple bottom line? What happened to the care for people and the environment? It's all about council reporting on dollars, not wasting dollars, being on time and budget. That's all that matters anymore. So it's working for itself, managing its own reputation, and then the people are out there going, hello.
And representation is not just for the elected. In the recovery environment, which seeks to foster community-led approaches, in some ways recovery workers and community leaders are also tasked with being representative. They need to ascertain and communicate the preferences of community. And because community is not a single-minded entity, the task becomes one of facilitating community to dialogue about and discern their collective choices. Because in the absence of this, government will and perhaps must make the decisions. So for Paula, it all comes down to a need to focus on skills and practices which facilitate democratic participation.
Along with channeling people to be tools of the economy, we are no longer very well practiced in kind of productive dialogue. Like we don't know how to listen and consider and there's this reluctance to change. Your position is your identity now. And if we can't go past that, we can't make group decisions. And if we can't make group decisions, we're not participating in democracy. So from the micro of our lives to the macro of our lives, it's missing out here for me. That's been my greatest concern in this whole recovery process. So MADRA's done it really well, but those are the people who can.
MADRA being the Mallacoota and District Recovery Association we heard about in the last episode, when we learned that it was the skills and experience of community members that enabled that community to work together and within the system. The flip side, though, is that if communities don't have people with these skills, they're likely to be seriously handicapped in the recovery process, often compounding pre-existing community disadvantages.
So for me, the conversation is how do we take that onus of governance off communities in a way that they're still responsible and can own everything, but that it makes it easy and nice for others to come in and join it. It's not something that we can just come in with a helicopter and deliver to a community, because communities might come up with other ways of doing this work that would work way better for them. So we can't do a cookie cutter and say the same thing that works in Clifton Creek doesn't work in Can River. Completely different people.
And the same approach definitely doesn't work for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Over 90,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were impacted by the Black Summer fires, and nearly 1,700 of them live in East Gippsland Shire Council. Bayame Williamson is an academic and Yulai man from northwest New South Wales who talks about how disasters significantly and uniquely impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
So these are just 4 ways, really, that we know that Indigenous peoples are uniquely impacted. So things like connection with country. But we all know Indigenous peoples are uniquely and intensely tied to their traditional homelands. Certain parts of the landscape as well, mountain ranges, water holes, certain plants, certain animals, certain resources, certain trees. We also know that Indigenous peoples are politically and economically marginalised in Australia. Indigenous peoples also have a really unique demographic profiles.
Here, Williamson is referring to the current much higher proportion of children and youth in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations.
Indigenous communities generally generally speaking, Indigenous peoples, Indigenous communities have a deep mistrust for non-Indigenous agencies and institutions.
Bayame also talks about how there's little or no accounting for the protection of places significant to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in disaster planning, even when there are formal rights of native title. So, when an Aborigine or Torres Strait Islander walks into an evacuation centre, they carry a set of unique and very different histories, sensitivities and needs.
The evacuation was a hazard that they encountered. The evacuation was caused because of the bushfires. The bushfires occurred because they were marginalised from managing their country. Marginalisation happened because they were removed from country. They were removed from country because of disease and conflict, and they were disease and conflict was caused because of the invasion of their homelands.
Understanding and being aware of these impacts and then taking action to prepare for and accommodate them in collaboration with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is democratic best practice. This is nothing about us without us in action. And for community recovery workers, it's slow, trust building, one relationship, one community, one place at a time. But there's also resistance.
I hear from a lot of senior people at council that let's not do that because the community they'll get snarky with us. So it's something about holding power and protecting themselves from vulnerability or discomfort.
And resistance cuts both ways.
I came out here with all this, I think I have good tools and lots of knowledge and good practice. And I got skinned alive in a community group and I had to leave because I tried to introduce a different way of operating too quickly and it just backfired horribly.
Paula's not the first to be soundly rejected when trying new things with groups. Through hard-earned experience, I've developed the mantra, meet them where they are, Kate, which I only ever remember to say when I have failed dismally to do exactly that. And Jenny Lloyd from Malakuta wrote to me about this issue, saying that early in the recovery process she'd made a series of mind maps and put them in the window of the recovery hub, and
the most common reaction was confusion and, what's this shit? Comms recalibrated as a result.
I've come out here and I'm a strange person. I've got an accent. I'm from somewhere else. So I also know, and I'm trying to live it, that these new ideas, whatever. People, again, they need to experience it, witness it, experience it, practice it. And then maybe it becomes their process and they can own it. Because people have been living here forever and they have their ways of doing things and the way they like it and they know, and it's their system, and I'm a new joiner and I need to learn it and respect it if I want any respect in return. And you see that broken so many times by government and institutions who say we know and we're going to come here and tell you how to recover, or we're going to tell you what to do. Here's the process, now use it. Where it really, we could enter a community and respect who they are and how what's been working, and just build from there.
So it's safe to say introducing new ways of doing things is painstaking incremental work requiring patience and respect and risk-taking.
Okay, things could work. I might participate now. It's long, slow, kind of generational change, but we've been going in the opposite direction. So the opportunities to show people in power that sharing it will have benefit for everybody is it's harder and harder to put those things in place.
And one of the big things that makes both convincing people to share power and to try new ways of doing things more complex, if not harder, well, actually, the big thing that makes all human behaviour more complex.
In this bureaucratic and professional world, we don't deal in feelings. We don't do emotion. We just do facts and numbers. And in doing that, we leave people cold because they come to things from passion or trauma Deep feelings. There's deep feelings involved.
So there's already a huge misalignment with a system that is emotionless, overflowing with and responding to people filled with emotions.
It can be really tricky and difficult when the feelings emerge. But what I'm trying to say is name them and share them and let it be okay. So I'm not saying that people should, stand there and scream obscenities at each other, but to be able to say, I'm really angry with you and I feel this way. And then that person actually, then there's empathy. There's no possibility of empathy without sharing feelings.
This can sound fairly idealistic, but Paula's seen it in action years ago when she was in Spain.
I was invited in to witness this meeting in a community in Spain that I was supposed to be studying. And it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and there were about 30 people, men and women, probably all of them were over 30, about 30 to 80 years old, in this great big room. And they pulled their chairs into a circle, and there were beer and cigarettes. It's like, this is who we are and what we do. But they had a process. And they did a sort of circle process. Somebody introduced what the problem was. They each took their allotted number of minutes to talk about their perception of the problem or their feelings about the problem. And at one point, this man, so this is when I started to really pay attention, this guy had some very strong things to say, and then we went down around the circle a little more, and this other guy, middle-aged dude with tears, looked over at the other guy and said, "You upset me so much with what you said. I feel really disrespected and hurt, and I want you to know that. Now let's go on." It's like, they've practiced that for years, right? But they can do it. And 3 rounds of the circle, and they had themselves a solution and a group of people to do it because they practiced it so much. But they could only get there because they shared what was down here.
In our corporate and bureaucratic world, we don't practice hard conversations. We don't express or consider emotions. It's not safe to be honest. We play nice outwardly, and inwardly we hurt and rage and plot and block. Because despite the irony that the science shows we are driven by emotion far more than by evidence, we persist in avoiding, evading, and minimizing how we feel. In spite of all the challenges and concerns, Paula's love for and commitment to her work in community is palpable.
I mean, what's the word public servants for? I'm proud of saying I'm a public servant. Every time I go through customs and they, you fill out that form and they ask you what you do, I write public servant, and I am. And it's worthy. The place I draw the line, which is why I'm talking to you, is when the organization that employs the public servants forgets their mission and starts to tell us that respecting that party line is more important than service to the public. I have to call it out.
It takes courage and integrity to call it out. Like the Chinese symbol for crisis being danger aside change point or opportunity, Paula seeks to find a silver lining in the mess.
Maybe this whole bushfire recovery of the last 3 years, this round of it, has been the dress rehearsal for a good dress rehearsal for future disasters. Keep the nimble, flexible, helpful systems in place and just be ready. Instead of try to recreate the wheel every time with some new whiz-bang, here's our logo kind of recovery product.
It seems pretty clear that, like it or lump it, we are going to be dragged into the future through disaster after disaster, forced to find better ways of dealing with the aftermath, which, if we aspire to peace and prosperity in the broad sense, means learning and practicing ways of fairly sharing power and privilege so that we have the tools to collaborate when we're surrounded by devastation. So to make your head spin just a little bit, I want to draw on a quote from, dare I say it, Milton Friedman, the rabid neoliberal from episode 4. Read here by AI Jeff, the classy podcaster with a resonant, strong tone.
Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function. To develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable.
So in the next 3 episodes, the rest of this series, we'll be hearing a bunch of stories and practical ideas, some of which may right now seem politically impossible, for how we can strengthen and build our democratic capacity at the local level, so they're lying around when we need them and they become the politically inevitable. First up, in episode 7, we look at the conditions necessary for democracy. From understanding and believing in its value to practical manifestations of equality. What supports and enables democracy? What are the forces that get in the way of democracy? And what do government and community need to do to navigate these successfully in recovery from disaster?
You know, it's very hard to build a relationship when the waters are rising or the fire's approaching or has passed. We need to be building those relationships beforehand across communities and supporting communities to build relationships together.
It's not rocket science, but it is rocket fuel for our capacity to change and work together. That's coming up in the next episode of Democracy After Disaster.
Democracy After Disaster is written, produced and hosted by me, Kate Lawrence from Storyground, on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to ancestors and elders. I thank them for their careful and sacred use of fire in this landscape and their inspiring sense of community. Thanks to Steve Pascoe and Jenny Lloyd for listening to every episode and being ever so kind, encouraging and insightful in response. This series is so much better for their wisdom and care. Huge thanks in this episode to Sue Yardley for lending her voice to dramatise a moment as only a living, breathing human voice can. This project is supported by a grant from the National Australia Bank. If you like the podcast, please rate and review it wherever you listen. And most importantly, tell your colleagues, friends and family. And if you have any comments, questions or feedback, please email me, kate@storyground.com.au. Thanks for listening.